Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Borders and Beyond. I'm your host, Martin. My co-host, Alok, is slightly busy, but I'm going to be talking about the recent firing of the Oreshnik missile by the Russian Federation into Ukraine. The idea behind this episode is basically to give people an idea of what the Russian missile is, its capabilities, and the strategic significance of that missile. But also, more importantly, what was the message that the Russian Federation was trying to send across to both the European countries as well as the West in general and the United States. In this episode, I'm going to, it's not going to be a long episode, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about the missile itself, and then I'm also going to talk about the strategic implications of it. Okay, let's start off. What's the missile, the Oreshnik missile? The Oreshnik missile is a three-stage missile. Basically, two of the stages are solid fuel. It flies at Mach 10, approximately about 12,500 to 13,500 kilometers per hour, has a minimum range of 700 kilometers and a maximum range of 5,500 kilometers. It is road mobile, so it's extremely mobile, so it makes it extremely hard to detect and extremely hard to destroy. Usually, most missiles, if they're not road mobile, they are in a silo, and obviously that means that whoever has the first strike capability tends to target those silos. But this is a road mobile missile, so making it extremely hard. And also, just remember that Russia is a huge, massive country, making it impossible to, cover the entire country by it doesn't matter how many missiles you have, it makes it very, very hard. So, this missile has 6 MIRVs, that is multiple independently reusable MIRV, multiple independent re-entry vehicles, basically. And within each of those 6 warheads, there are 6 sub-ammunitions in it, meaning that it can actually take out 36 targets with one hit. Flying at Mach 10 means there are no known air defense system in the world that can take it out. Right? None. Absolutely none. There's nothing in anyone's arsenal, that is, including anyone in Europe, France, or Germany, or even the Americans, both the THAAD systems or the Patriot system, none of them can take this out. Right? That's how dangerous this thing is. And it's obviously a very, very, it's not a weapon you use in winning a war. It's a weapon used strategically to send messages. You say, please stop messing with us. Now, in its steep terminal phase, what it does is it's going at 2 to 3 kilometers per second, and it can also maneuver. Now, the other thing I also wanted to mention with this particular missile is that it also deploys decoy warheads just so as to confuse the air defense systems, or if say, for example, if it's being fired in a country, just to confuse the air defense systems, it does deploy decoy warheads. Previously, the Oreshnik missile has only been fired twice now. One was in Dnipro, and that was in November of 2024, and now on January 9th. Now, there is a lot of significance behind this. For example, the November firing, the firing in November 21st of 2024 in the Dnipro, was basically to let the world know that they had the weapon and they're quite capable of using it. Now, it was at that stage an experimental weapon. Immediately after that, it went into serial production. And the Russians are expected to produce between 25 to 30 missiles per year. Currently, they have actually stationed about 6 in Belarus, and there's about 16 or so in the Russian Federation. What it means is that there's not a lot of it, basically, so they have to use it very sparingly, and it's basically there to send a message to say, okay, we have this operationalized and we're quite willing to use it. Now, it has the capability of having, basically, it can take a new conventional warhead, it can take a nuclear warhead, and it can have no warheads, or basically a dummy warhead. Now, in both occasions, both on November 1st and on January 9th, they used a dummy warhead. So there was no explosive part of it. However, the kinetic energy that it has when it hits a target is enough to completely destroy the target. Right? In this particular case, on January 9th, when they fired it, they're firing it at they're firing it at a gas storage facility that was deep underground in Lviv, and it was basically about 40 kilometers from the Polish border. So that kind of gives you an idea of its accuracy also. Now, unlike the Iskander, which has a CEP or accuracy of between 5 to 7 meters, the Oreshnik is believed to be between 50 to 100 using the latest GLONASS guidance systems. Right? Now, why did the Russian Federation fire this missile? Well, there's a number of reasons. Obviously, of recent, you've heard of the Americans boarding a Russian flag tanker, and there was freedom of navigation, something that's been there for a number of years, right? And it's been there for since, well, I would say probably about nearly more than 100 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So what is currently happening is, the French are busy attacking Russian ships, and these are, I'm pretending it to be and saying that, oh, these are Ukrainians. I mean, God only knows how Ukraine has access to, has the capability of hitting Russian ships off the coast of Africa. You know pretty well that's not possible. And so this game is being played, and the French are doing their part of it, attacking it, as they call it, the shadow fleet. It's nothing shadow about it. It's just the fact that they are insured by the Russian Federation. They're not insured in London. So all of a sudden, if it's not insured in London, they say it's a shadow fleet. And now what the Russian government has decided to do was, obviously, they started to paint all their vessels with the Russian flags. So basically, if you're hitting one of them, you're basically hitting Russia. And so what the Americans did was hit one of the Russian tankers, which had a Russian flag on it. But that in itself was not the issue that got the Russians quite annoyed. Prior to that, there was an attempted decapitation strike of Vladimir Putin. There was about 90 odd drones that were fired at his summer residence in the Valdai. They were all shot down. And, this is something that you don't do, right? You don't go trying to decapitate. I mean, Russia is not, it's not Venezuela. So that, coupled with this boarding of a Russian oil tanker, which apparently was, you know, what was the word? Was suspected of removing Venezuelan oil. Created this situation where the Russian Federation thought, all right, it's time to send a very, very strong signal. They've been putting up with a lot of this nonsense. And there's only a certain limit to which you can do this before you kind of lose your patience. The Russians have been maintaining a fair bit of strategic patience, and I don't know how they're doing. But the problem with doing strategic patience is that your adversary might read it as weakness, right? And that is a problem. Now, if they start reading it as weakness, then you're going to have escalation. So at some point, the Russians thought to themselves, look, we need to kind of make it very clear that we're not going to put up with this. Right? We can't afford to put up with this. We ain't going to put up with this. So yes, so that's basically where that's basically the reason why the Russians decided that okay, they just wanted to demonstrate that they have some capabilities that the adversaries would have nothing to counter with, and hence the firing of the Oreshnik missile. It also is a way of telling the West that if you continue doing what you're doing, we will have no choice but to use one of these on you guys, right? And you have to kind of look at it and say, yeah, all right, that makes sense. It kind of makes sense a lot of sense too. Immediately after firing those missiles and obviously taking out the gas storage plant, which was was in Lviv, we had interesting statements come out of some of the European capitals. Normally, they're very gung-ho about doing things, but all of a sudden, everyone is kind of like looking at it and saying, maybe it's not a great idea. So immediately after that, we had Mertz come out and say, he started singing a different song. And basically he's indicated that we need to consult with Russia. We just can't, think that we can force Russia to do things or bend Russia to our will. Because at the end of the day, the Ukraine war, Russia is winning it, comprehensively winning it. That's the part that most people, if you're not aware of it, that's basically what is happening. So it's unheard of that the losing party dictates terms. I mean, it's not heard of, right? So as a result, all of a sudden, Ukraine is busy trying to dictate terms, but the fact matters they're losing, and we have all the European Union and West of America basically behind them. Hence, they have that confidence to try and dictate terms. But the Russians are saying we're not going to play ball. And so this change of tune from Merz, Chancellor of Germany, is a positive step. I'm not saying it's great, but it's a positive step. But what was also interesting was that Giorgia Meloni from Italy also said, look, we need to start talking with the Russians. It's not helpful that Trump has basically gone in and threatened that it's going to take over Greenland. So all of a sudden, the Europeans are kind of feeling like, hang on, we went to this war with the backing Ukraine to full tilt, thinking the United States was behind us. But all of a sudden, the United States is even threatening us. I mean, imagine that Greenland is well, I mean, the Danes usually manage it or look after it. And so all of a sudden the Americans are saying that, no, we want it. And they are unwilling, and Donald Trump has basically said, look, he will try and purchase it or he will just take it by force. Doesn't really matter. Which has kind of left the Danes in a bit of a pickle, to be honest. Now, not too sure. I'm not too sure it will come to that, but there is a bit of a problem, right? So this sudden change of tune is a combination of what Trump is saying about Greenland and all the feeling in Europe that NATO is on its last legs, or America's commitment to Europe is kind of fading away, and then obviously the threat to Greenland, and so the Europeans are thinking to themselves, well, we need to start talking to the Russians. That's basically it in a nutshell. So yeah, so basically the fundamentals behind it also means that everyone is now trying to reassess. There's a lot of churn that is happening in the international global community, and what's driving this is obviously, there is the hegemony, the American hegemony is. There's a feeling that the Americans are on the downward decline, and obviously the Chinese are on the rise, and the Russians are also on the rise. And obviously the Indians are also on the rise. And so there are some new players in the world, and what the Americans are trying to do is to hang on to whatever dominance they have. And they're not going to go down without a fight, and that's normal. And that should be expected. The only thing we can all cross our fingers on is hope that it doesn't end up being a nuclear war. And I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail, because at some point everyone has to kind of look at each other and say, look, if people start using nuclear weapons, none of us will be alive. So none of us will be alive. The Russians have the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Americans have the second largest. The Chinese have about approximately 700 to 1,000. The English have about, I think at the top end, maybe 100. That's what the experiencers say, about 70. The French have about 70. The Indians have about 175. Pakistanis have probably about 170 odd. There's a significant amount of nuclear weapons. It doesn't really matter. This is all theoretical because apparently now, once the Russians and the Americans all open up their entire nuclear arsenal, there's nothing left. It doesn't matter whether India has 175, the French have 70 or whatever. It's irrelevant because there'll be no Earth. There'll be no human beings living. It will just be a nuclear winter. So I'm hoping that, none of us have to go through that, right? So yeah. And a little bit more about the Oreshnik. It is an IRBM, intermediate range ballistic missile. Depending on, as I mentioned, depending on where it's fired from, it can hit most parts of Europe. So technically, hypothetically, if it is fired from Belarus, most of the United Kingdom can be hit. Obviously, France can be hit. Italy, all those areas can be hit. Germany is not a question, obviously, it's within range. So that basically means, most of Europe will be in a lot of trouble. Before the Russians fired this particular missile, the Orishnik, by the way, it's known as hazel tree in Russian. That's what it means in English. Sorry, apologies. Before they fired this, they informed the Americans, said that they're going to be firing this. So the Americans don't mistake it as a nuclear or a nuclear missile, and all of a sudden NORAD goes into meltdown, everybody goes into meltdown, and the Americans start opening up their silos and things like that. So they gave the Americans advance warning, which the Americans then told their guys and the embassy guys in Kiev that this is going to be happening. But before Kiev could react, the missile had already hit. And apparently, it only took 15 minutes from where it was fired, which was Kapsut. What is it called? Kapsutin Yar. and that's where it was fired from. Okay, in terms of geopolitics, obviously, it's basically signaling escalation dominance. And that we have this weapon and there's nothing you can do. There's, as I said, there's no antidote to it. There's not a single AAD, air defense missile system that is capable of bringing this down. So this is, once it is fired, yeah. And if it's targeting a specific area, that area is going to have issues. I mean, the devastation itself with a dummy warhead is really, really bad. And then apparently 2 of these with just normal conventional warheads is equivalent to a nuclear bomb going off, right? Without the radiation. So that's how incredibly powerful and devastating this particular missile is. And that's a combination, the reason being obviously it's its speed. And so the kinetic energy, it vaporizes everything, literally everything. Right? Yeah. So, in a nutshell, what I'm going to say here is that, look, we are in a situation where I'm hoping, well, let's just hope that everyone cooler heads prevail. Let's hope that cooler heads prevail, and we don't end up with a nuclear war. I mean, there was, I think the strategic patience shown by the Russian Federation has been phenomenal, but I think it's wearing thin. And I'm hoping that the message has been heeded by other leaders to say, all right, I think enough of this is done. We should probably all sit down and have a conversation. At the end of the day, like anything else in life, if there are 2 parties in a fight, there's no point, just one party coming up with negotiations and not, and putting the terms without actually discussing with the other party what their terms are and asking for what their terms are either, pretending that it doesn't matter. It doesn't work like that. Even in life, in normal life, right? If you both, there are 2 people fighting, you need to sit them down and talk to them and say, okay, why did you start fighting? What's your problem? And you ask the other person, why did you start fighting? What's your problem? And through that process of negotiating, you come to a compromise. You don't just force someone to, you don't force someone and say, listen, you're going to listen to what we're saying. The only way that would work is if you're winning, right? In which case you dictate terms. And in this particular case, it's Russia that is winning. So for the European Union and Ukraine to dictate terms, it's silly. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm hoping that everyone just comes up to their senses and says, all right, like with this game, we're not going to play this enough. And we'll move on. In terms of everything else, there's nothing else I can talk about. I just wanted to come here and talk to you guys about the Oreshnik. It's an incredible missile. And look, I'm going to be doing these kind of short clips moving forward as things come up. And look, if hopefully this is my first time, by the way, so as you can see, I'm a bit uneasy and not coherent in certain aspects of it, simply because I'm used to the 2-person talking and asking a question and answering it. And so in this particular case, I am kind of I'm freestyling it or freeballing it and just running with it. So hopefully I'll get better with this and we'll have a bit more structure. But yes, this will be happening more often now because there's a lot of events that are currently happening that we just I can't wait for, any of my colleagues or hosts to come on board so that we can talk about it. By the time we start talking about it, just move on. It's something more automatic happens in moments. So moving forward, I will endeavor to start recording, what's currently happening and give you my take. For those of you who are coming here for the first time, thank you very much for listening to my monologue. I appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe. For those of you who are returning, I appreciate you doing this and appreciate your support and give us a thumbs up. And on that lovely note, I say goodbye. Thank you.